how do you think about the mechanism of politics starting to reflect the decentralization of knowledge and expertise?
I think there's two. It's both centralization and decentralization occurring at the same time. So if we just take the big example of Twitter and now rebranded X, I'm a huge supporter of what Elon Musk has been doing. I was a Twitter Files journalist. I've written on, there's been some controversial edge cases around India and Turkey where censorship was demanded of them. I was involved in one in Brazil. He did the right thing on Brazil. And he's also, they're trying to get along with different power centers, particularly the advertisers demand a lot of censorship. And so just recently there was a congressional hearing about the ways in which the advertisers collude to deprive conservative and libertarian or disfavored outlets of funding, and they're exercising control in that way. And is that legal? Is it ethical? What is it? The big change here is that X is now a much more free speech platform than it was. It's not 100%, but that's not really possible. The problem is that we're really now dependent on one man to stay strong with us. And I was actually I'm not an electric car guy at all. I'm not a rocket guy either. But I was very happy that Elon Musk got that $46 billion bonus payment, because I was like, well, that covers his loss on Twitter and more. And so there's he's less vulnerable to the financial pressures to censor. On the other hand, I don't love it that our free speech rights depend on a single person. Just as a principle, it doesn't matter who the person is,
It is a kind of benevolent monarchism.
He's the king. I mean, it's a monarchy. So I believe in the First Amendment, which says as a spiritual and moral matter that free speech comes before the government. Government doesn't give us free speech rights. We have free speech rights that are inalienable to us as human beings. That's very clear in our founding documents. And then we affirm the government should exist, but free speech comes first. What does that mean in the age of the internet? I mean, for me, what I have argued is that the distinction in the law between publishers and social media platforms give special rights to the social media platforms, special liability protections.
This is Section 230?
Section 230, 1996 Communication Decency Act. My view is that if you're going to be a social media platform, then you should have as a rule that you're going to allow adult users to decide on their own legal content. So obviously what kids get should be up to their parents in some ways and restricted. I think illegal content that we all agree should be censored without question, but that adult users should decide. Is that what we have now at X? We're getting there, a little closer. I'd feel better if that were the law that required that. On the other hand, and I've testified on it, and I've told Elon what I think, there's no movement towards implementing Michael Shellenberger's proposal on this, which some might call a common carrier proposal, but I would just call it, adult user control of legal content. No one's moving towards that, and I'm not pushing it aggressively, in part because so far it's looking pretty good on X. But yeah, if you get to a place where suddenly Elon's replaced, or he loses his mind or whatever, and he starts to become more censorious,
dies in a car accident,
something happens, heaven forbid, I would then worry about it, because I do feel like, and people accuse me of exaggerating, but I do feel like if you don't have X, you really are in a more totalitarian type situation, because the censorship on Facebook is it's just insane. TikTok censors you if you refuse to go along with the company line that people can change their biological sex, which is absurd. And so where is the free speech platform? I mean, traditional media, it's just all the problems with traditional media. So you only really have X. And in the case of Brazil, you had the Supreme Court, a single justice out of control, that was trying to not just censor people, but to ban them. Politicians, and we're talking about politicians and journalists, which is career death. I mean, that's it. If you can't be on social media platforms, he wanted to ban them entirely. Well, if that were to occur, you're in a totalitarian situation. So on the one hand, I think we're in a really dangerous, fragile moment. On the other hand, I'm a little bit more relaxed. We also lost a Supreme Court thing, which we don't need to go into, but basically that's kind of where we're at.
The Missouri case?
Yeah, the Missouri case. I mean, that's kind of where we're at, is that please God protect Elon Musk. And also at some point, I would love to see a stronger foundation for our free speech protections.
It's funny you'd mentioned common carrier. Yesterday I had Randy Barnett, who I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he's one of the sort of leading intellectual architects of originalism. He's also basically like an anarcho-libertarian minded person. So he's like simultaneously he's like a radical and been effective in having an impact on legal thought on the conservative / libertarian side of the spectrum, the Federalist Society,
right,
etc.
Right.
And he made a similar argument. We didn't dive super deep, but he was basically saying that, like, look, this issue of, are you a common carrier? Are you in a platform position where there's other things happening? I'm not sure quite. I haven't grappled with this enough to think about fully, like, what are the criteria? Is it about network effects? Is it about infrastructure? Because, I think some of the arguments historically were, well, once you've run the telephone lines, it's really, really expensive. It involves all kinds of complex property rights and eminent domain. So you no longer have, by virtue of the physical infrastructure, easy entrance and exit.
Right.
And so we need to have some, essentially, regulation.
Right.
In the form of common carrier. I mean, it is a regulatory regime to say, oh, you're going to build this platform, but you have to abide by these rules.
Right. Yes. Well, I mean, you basically just described this very long argument that had existed before the internet and the social media had risen to power, and now we're coming back to it. But yeah, I mean, it's called a natural monopoly. And it first starts with the electrical grid. Something because I work on energy, it was a very known thing where, I mean, you don't want to have like 5 companies stringing electrical wire to every house. I mean, it's insane. And then you choose which company. I mean, it's so total. Everybody recognizes a waste of resource. So it was a natural monopoly in the sense it made sense for it to be a monopoly. And then you have these regulated monopoly utilities, and they can either be government owned or they can be private. But either way, they're really heavily regulated, so they can't price gouge. They can't just be like, or they can't deprive you service because you're a libertarian. They can't say, we're not going to provide electrical service to you because you're a libertarian.
Some people want that.
Yeah. So then the question is, so everyone's accepted that on electricity markets. I mean, for the most part, there was some, it doesn't matter. There's some tangents there. But then you get to the social media platforms and you go, well, are there network effects? And even Jack Dorsey, the creator of Twitter, has been sort of a denier of these network effects. So they go, we're going to go do decentralization. So we're going to go do, I think this was Blue Sky, and there's one called Mastodon, there's one called Nostr.
Yeah, sort of federated.
Yeah, you kind of go, and when I'm an open-minded guy. I mean, I'm skeptical because I think network effects are very real. I mean, they're dead. Like, you go there and you're like, well, that post has 0 views and 0 likes and whatever. And meanwhile, like, X is just like, I mean, even Threads, which is the new Twitter clone that Facebook did, it's also like they're throttling the social and political news. So there's really nothing like X Twitter that gets you this intense, like, just density of information and virality. And so the virality is this new thing. And interestingly enough, the people that want more censorship are also obsessed with virality. Like, virality is like the main event in some ways, because if you're viral, then you're actually reaching a lot of people and you're changing opinion, and it's also how you make a business, and there's all sorts of reasons to be concerned about that. How do you get virality on these decentralized networks? I don't think it'll ever happen. I mean, that's my own personal view of it. Hence, my view that you need that condition, that if you're going to have this social media status. But it's complicated because I'll tell you the other complicated thing. When you open up your New York Times app now on your iPhone or your smartphone, what's so interesting is that in the lower right-hand corner, there's a little blue notifications signal that looks identical to the little blue notifications on Twitter. And we're such basic animals. Like, right. You open up and you go, look, I got notifications. So I think the New York Times in particular is becoming more like a platform, and then the platforms like Twitter are becoming more like publishers. And so I've been encouraging this trend so you see on Twitter, you can now publish articles, and the format looks a little bit more like Substack, and they really believe in this and they want to do that. And I've been encouraging them to have like paywalls, and so you can make money. So you're starting to see a blurring of the line between publisher and social media platform, which just makes it even more complicated. And actually, I think kind of in some ways, I don't know if it undermines my argument, but it certainly complicates my argument for what I think we ought to do. But I don't know what else to say. I just describe what I'm seeing to policymakers and others, and I think that they're kind of like, let's just see how this all shakes out a little bit right now. The other observation I was going to make is that I think in a moment when you have this high level of polarization and nothing's been able to happen in Congress, you have seen more reliance on the Supreme Court. And I think to some extent, I think it's been wonderful. And I think that some of the Supreme Court decisions, I agree with the Chevron decision, for example, but I also agree with the decision they made on homelessness. They just made a decision that the local cities can clear homeless encampments. But it was also a decision where I was like, that only went to the Supreme Court because they're not able to deal with this problem. But like the Supreme Court, like homelessness needs to be dealt with, and I don't want to overstate its complexity, but I wrote a whole book on it, and obviously I think it requires a whole set of things. Supreme Court, that's not their job. They don't write policy. They're mostly out there to say, yes, you can do that. No, you can't. So I do think, though, that in a kind of legitimation crisis and also a political crisis, a governance crisis, things are going to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court can be like, yeah, yes or no, but we can't solve that problem. That has to be solved by government.
In this media world that we live in, one in which anyone, our own kids, can become influencers because of the virality function that's baked into the platforms. One thing that clearly happens is audience capture, which is to say you develop an audience. Almost always that audience, and certainly the one that's the most financially viable, is the one that best aligns with your actual values. And they then start to make it not great when you challenge them.
Right.
Like, we've been doing...
Yeah.
And it's because it's like, I didn't come here for this. Like, I don't like this. I mean, we've been doing this show for 2.5 years, and the past year-ish, it's starting to get more traction organically. I had an interview with Bill de Blasio.
Mm-hmm. People didn't like that. You're basically like,
no. That was quick. Yeah. It was, and it didn't get any viewership as a result, because it was like, none of the engagement metrics are working here. The Dad Saves America audience doesn't like Bill de Blasio.
Right.
Now, part of that breaks my heart, because it was like, I think as a dad and as someone that wants to have a positive impact on the world, I kind of want us to be able to reach across the divide. And we had a nice conversation, and I didn't talk about COVID for a bunch of reasons. They weren't like, I'm a coward. It was more like, no, we had a very specific conversation we were going to have.
Yeah.
And it's like, nah, that guy sucks, and that's that.
Right.
How do you,
deal with
as
that?
Someone that cares about pursuing truth and is doing that along a lot of different issues that are really, we've mentioned them, like climate, trans, censorship, homelessness. These are all hard things.
Yes.
How do you keep yourself from getting sucked into a vortex of audience capture?
Yeah, it's a huge important question. I have a simplistic, tactical solution, and then a more that's easy, and then a more difficult one. The simple one is that you can just have debates with people. And so I think if it's more of a debate with Bill de Blasio, or debate between Bill de Blasio and somebody else, your audience would have been happy. And so you can deliver both. You can deliver having the other view there, but also that. And then people actually really love debates right now. In fact, I think there's not enough debates.
Agreed.
I just did one for Barry Weiss's The Free Press on Crime in San Francisco, and it sold out in like 10 minutes. Like all my friends were like, "Oh, we can't go. It's just sold out." And everyone's like, "Why is there not a bigger venue?" But I think it showed people want the debate. I also think people want in-person gatherings, because I think that there's another paradox, is that we're so online that people actually do want the in-person. So that's one thing. The second one is, obviously you don't want to be captured by your audience. And so the best way to not be captured by your audience is to not be captured by your audience. And how do you do that? Well, you do have to you have to do that stuff. And I think that we had it on Israel, where, October 7th happens, and we're just all floored by it. One of my colleagues, her father's Israeli, but he was, an anti-Zionist Israeli, so it's very complicated. And they were they're very left wing, but she's moved more to the right. But we wrote a pretty simple thing, which was sort of like Israel has a right to exist, it has a right to defend itself, and it should minimize civilian casualties and protect free speech. I mean, it was about as like you could be accused us of being rather basic.
Milk toast, Middle East commentary.
Yeah, you can milk toast, but of course it was just too early for our readers, and we lost a bunch of readers, and we kind of processed that, and then a few days later we were like, we lost readers, and if you wanted to be, just have, us repeat back to you what you already believe, then you've signed up for the wrong publication. So it was good that you left. Long story short, it's a happy ending. We got more subscribers than we had lost, and I think there is something there where readers. I had one person wrote me a nice long email, and she was like, I'm back on. I was mad. I still probably disagree with you. In terms of, because it's a little bit like how much civilian casualties in a certain way, because it is war. But she was like, yeah, I don't want to just be told what I think either. So you do cultivate your audience a little bit, and I think you do train them a bit to say, yeah, you're not going to agree with everything here, and you're not going to even read everything. I mean, like our open rates are, you'd wish it were 100%. Yeah. It's much lower. And there's some people that just resubscribe and they don't really read a lot of it. There's some people that might read it but then unsubscribe. So it's just, that's the other thing I was going to say though is that there's also critic capture, which I will shout out to Ethan Strauss, who wrote a really good essay about it. That some people are captured by their audience, other people can be captured by their critics. In other words, you get criticized and then you end up they're in your head. And people always say, oh, living rent. The whole expression is living rent free in someone's head. But I think it's okay. In other words, I'm always sort of like, I got a bunch of little voices in my head. I definitely have some of my readers in my head. I have some of my critics in my head, and yeah, and you need to, I think especially with difficult ones, take the time. This is going to sound really weird, but honestly, I'm so much better at making my judgments after I've done some physical exercise. Yeah. In particular, both cardio and lifting, because there's no, I was like cardio for anxiety, weightlifting for anger. But once your head is more clear of the emotions that are stirred, either the fear of losing subscribers or the anger at being criticized, which is a totally natural reaction, I think you do come out of it being like, all right, here's my view. And I think you're also in a much better position to be like, I might have been wrong about that. I might have overstated that, or I got this thing wrong.
I think there's so much to that, just at the Andrew Huberman of it all.
Yes.
Like needing to walk, needing to be able to process with forward motion and all of that stuff.
Absolutely. It's amazing that his recipe is so simple, and yet the demand for it keeps going up, and people want more and more from him. It's like I know that I need morning light and exercise and to eat right and to get a good amount of sleep, but I would like to have you tell me it again and show me more signs. I'm the same way. I'm a huge fan of his.
If you like this clip, you should check out the full video and all the other great content we've got at Dad Saves America. So be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that bell so you won't miss our new stuff as it drops each week.